Hey friends, welcome back to Becoming Unbound, where we explore the journeys, challenges, and even triumphs of breaking free and building that life of your dreams. I'm your host, Carly Butler, and I'm here to inspire and empower you to embrace the unbound life, where possibilities are endless and freedom is yours to claim. So today, I am absolutely thrilled to be joined by Dawn, who is a dear client of mine and a fellow podcaster. So let's dive in and find out how Dawn is becoming unbound. Dawn, welcome to the show.
I love it. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Excited to be here.
Thanks for being here. This is awesome. We are sort of both. It's interesting. We're kind of both in those like beautiful beginning stages of podcasting. So it's very interesting. I feel like we're learning a lot. This is my first podcast that I've ever like put together for myself, but I've been working as your podcast manager for the last couple months now. And let's tell the audience how we became connected. It's quite a beautiful, like epic story.
Yeah, absolutely. So we met in Kelowna, BC. We are connected to Kaylor. I'm in his business program and his podcast program. And we met at his retreat in September. And so we met and you told me that you were a podcast manager. You've taken me on as a client. I am a terrible client because technology is not my thing. I know how to grow vegetables. I know how to be a farmer, but me and computers are like matching gas. So yeah, thanks for your patience with me. And yeah, let's dive into this. Let's have a good conversation.
Yeah, it's amazing the impact that Kaylor Betts has had on both of our lives. It's really, really something special. Like, I don't think I've ever been connected to such a human being who is such a connector. Like, it feels like when we walked away from that retreat, like it literally just, I don't know, I walked away with a huge like group of friends and like we're talking still all the time. I met you, like we got to connect with his team. It just feels like these like awake communities that we end up embedding ourselves into. They're stronger than any community that I've ever been into. And I've been in like, whether it's an expat community or a yoga community, like I feel like I've always thought I knew the definition of community, and it feels like this is like next level. Like we have taken it to an entirely next level of what community means to me. And it's wild. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, me too. I've met a lot of people at that retreat and have stayed connected with them, and they're friends on my Facebook, and I'm trying to work with them, and they've been on my podcast, and just the communication and just being on social media, just following each other and building community. And that's one thing that I have found in the last year since I sold my farm is, people still want community. My farm was my community, my customers and my people there. And so just building a different community now has been really good. And I think people in society right now are really looking for community, looking for depth of relationship, looking for depth of human connection and things like that. And yeah, at that retreat, I without a doubt, we found it, and we found it very easily and very simply. And it was just almost instant, like, connecting with people like-minded and with the same values and the same morals and just, the same goals in life.
Yeah, I think that word values really comes out to me. And I think that's why when you find communities that share the same or similar values, maybe they're not always all the same, but that's what I think takes it to the next level, is those values that you find in community. And if you know your own values, which they change, they ebb, they flow, but if you can find that, like that's truly where there's some serious magic. So I'm so glad that we got a chance to connect with that community. And it is the true, like the awake and winning community. So on my podcast, we like to talk about sort of what it means to become unbound. And a lot of it is sort of waking up to whether it's your own personal things that are going on in your life, old relationships, old patterns. Maybe it's that 9-to-5 job that you're like, oh man, or maybe it's that literal 24-hour a day farming job that you're like, wow, this is taking everything out of me. So Dawn, I'm really curious, was there a specific moment in your life where you were like, oh, yeah, I got to do something different here, or there's another path for me? Or was there a moment that really just lit you up that you were like, oh, here it is. There's something else going on here?
Yes, but not necessarily in a positive way, in a negative way. So I was a farmer. I was born and raised in the greenhouse, or not born into the greenhouse industry, but I've been farming since I was 5 years old. I'm 44 now. And yeah, raised in the industry. I wrote a little story when I was in grade 1 about Dawn's greenhouse. Like that's how entrenched I was into what I was doing. And so I had a 36,000 square foot greenhouse. I did 20 acres of garden. I had 299 chickens. I had 35 sheep. I sold food. I grew food and raised food and sold food directly to my customers at farmers markets and built relationships that way. And I loved it. Like that was my entire identity. So when it comes to not having my farm, I sold it almost a year ago, or exactly almost a year ago. I sold my farm, and I came to that realization that I had to sell my farm, like not this past September, but the September before. In farming, it's high roller gambling. So you are always going in the hole, in the hole, in the hole to hopefully catch a breath of air to go in the hole, in the hole, in the hole again. That's the way farming is. And when I got to last September and I realized I was $100,000 short to keep going for one more year, in farming, you finagle things. So you either sell something off, or you know, try and make changes to try and keep farming. But when it came to September and I realized, shoot, I'm 100 grand short, there was no selling off assets. There was no finagling. I could not see my way out of the situation. And I just realized I had to put my farm up for sale, which actually broke my heart. And so this past year, I've been grieving my farm because it was my identity. It was who I was. And I've questioned why. I've got a relationship with God and Jesus, and I've questioned why. Why did I have to sell my farm? When I was a farmer, it was about relationship. I had people come to me, and I've told the story many, many times, and I will continue to tell it. There was this one woman, she would bring her bag of food bank items to me at the farmer's market, and I would take her bag of toothpaste and craft dinner and rice, and I would trade her for a bag of vegetables, because if if they're hungry, feed them. And so that's how I really felt that I was supposed to do things in the world. If someone's asking for food, I felt called to feed them. And so I don't understand why I had to give up my farm, other than I needed to grow as a person. And I'm not blaming God, but I think God is taking me on a journey to something bigger. There's something bigger than my farm. And I know how much my farm meant to me, and I loved it. And so I'm just trying to figure out what the next bigger is. And so I sold the farm and started coaching, online coaching. Sorry, that
Amazing.
was so long-winded.
That is okay. There's so many points that I want to connect to that. And I think that is a beautiful moment of awakening, and it's so hard and heartbreaking. Like I remember the same thing with me. I was like, "Ooh, I don't think I can be a teacher anymore." Like, and it was same with you. It was my identity. You were a farmer, I was a teacher. Like that was who I was, like Carly Butler, the teacher. Like that's who my friends knew me. Like teaching children was my thing. I thought that was the thing that lit my soul on fire. And like, I remember even being in a call with Kayla, and Kayla was like, who knows their North Star? And I was like, me, 100% me. I'm a teacher. I'm going to change the world. I'm going to like teach freedom to children. And like, this is what I was going to do. And then, yeah, God kind of came down and was like, well, you're tired, you're burnt out, you are anxious, you are not living. You come home at the end of the day and like, I can't talk to anybody. I have to lay on my couch and just be silent. Like, I'm not living. And so I totally hear you when you say like that was your identity, and giving that up. Like, there is a grieving process, and it's a lot.
It has been a lot to grieve that, because yeah, as a farmer, it's not just a job that you go to. I was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It did not shut off. And to be honest, I thrived on it. I loved it. I wasn't burnt out doing it. I was frustrated that I couldn't keep going. Even if I broke even, I didn't even have to make money at it. Even if I would have broke even, I'd have been a happy camper. But it just wasn't where it was at. And so now I'm on the next journey, and I've been grieving this last year, and where's this going to take me? I'm curious about that.
Well, and I think it's beautiful that I think a lot of and it sounds like you are still in, and that's why I feel like I love the name Becoming Unbound, is because we are always becoming the next best version of ourselves. And I feel like you took that leap of faith by putting that for sale sign on your farm. That's probably, oh my gosh. And the amount of like efforts that had gone into that, and you didn't let that. Have you ever heard of sunken cost fallacy, of like all the costs that you put into something, and then you feel like that effort and the cost that you have in it has you basically stuck, and you've already invested too much into something to back away? It kind of reminds me of that, but it also reminds me of that big leap of faith that you had to take to be like, okay, I'm selling this, and like, here, like, God, I'm listening. Here you go. This is what I'm doing. And you're still in the process of not knowing what to do. And yet you're still showing up here every single day, trying to make it work, getting through the technology and like learning so many new things. I bet you, like, if you think about you 5 years from now and thinking about you now, it would have been so different, right?
Absolutely. I feel like Moses in the desert, for a biblical reference. Like, he cast me out of my farm, and I'm just following, and I'm eating manna on the way, and I'm just trusting that the Lord has a bigger plan and a different plan for me, and he's shaping me and molding me on the journey. And yeah, it's been very different because I had administrative assistants on my farm, and when I had my store and things like that. So I'm used to running companies. I'm not used to starting from the ground and building a company from the very small stages. Like, I jumped into a 36,000 square foot greenhouse and bit off more than I can chew, um, to this, which is it's totally different, and technology is not my thing. And so, yeah, it's been a rough go, but a good go. And I'm learning so much.
Good. Well, Dawn, it sounds like you're keeping pretty on brand with biting off more than you can chew, and like going full into the deep end and just trusting. It sounds like that trust in the Lord, and trust in, and that faith that you have to know that there is something greater out there. And what I'm hearing from you is that, and I relate it to mine. Like, I was teaching in a classroom, and I always felt like I was just stuck in in the four walls of my classroom. And I was like, well, this is great. And I'm teaching to a certain amount of people. And I know that the collective consciousness feels this vibration, and it goes out, and God sees me, and I'm teaching God's children, and this is amazing. And it also sounds like that maybe is a connection for you. Like, you were feeding people from your farm, but now what you're doing is like you can feed people on this massive scale because you're teaching the skill versus just feeding physically. Like, here's the food that you need. It's like you've taken it to like this, you've widened your whole lens of what you're able to do by teaching people this skill. So maybe tell us a little bit about your coaching program and how this was inspired, and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. So on my farm, I actually fed probably about 100,000 people, or 100,000 mouths in a year, which is not a small number. And so in selling the farm and in going through this teaching thing, and I just kind of happened into Kaler's program and things like that. Uh, so in teaching people, there's a saying: if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. And I really feel like in society, we have lost those values and those skills. So many people don't have gardens. They don't have chickens. They don't have things like that. They don't know how to live like grandma did. They don't know how to can. They don't know how to freeze and preserve and eat seasonally and things like that. And so that's where I'm at, is I'm teaching people how to live like your grandma lived. And in doing so, one of my fears coming off my farm, actually, because I've got a bit of a tinfoil hat, was if shit really hits the fan, what am I going to feed my kids? I was scared of that. I was afraid of, what am I going to feed my children if things go so sideways? What am I going to do? And yeah, I was able to land in the country here. I've got a little greenhouse. I've got some garden. I've got some chickens. I have a mini pig that's not for eating, but unless we had to, I'm a omnivore. I eat meat. I carnivore too. The point is we need to learn how to live like that, and we need to take our food system back smaller, actually. So when I had my farm, part of my issue was I was competing against people that would buy and sell from the big corporations at farmers markets and buy and sell it for cheaper than what I could grow and sell it for. And that's a problem. You know, if we're just feeding into this massive, massive grocery system, it's a one size fits all. And I've said for a long time, he who controls the food controls the people. And so I want to take my food into my own hands. It's something I can control. I can't control what Trudeau does. I can't control what Trump does, but I can control what I do in my backyard with my own food and with my own plates and with my own family. And so that's where it's at, is teaching people how to take back their freedom and their control and become ungovernable so that, you know, you can survive on your own for a while.
Yeah, wow. And so that leads me right into my next question of what does freedom look like for you in your life? Because there's so many ways to define that, whether that's free from government control, whether that's free from a mindset, free from a relationship, free from a job, financial freedom. Like there's so many different definitions of that. And it sounds like to me, your idea of freedom is that freedom of providing food and becoming sustainable so that you are free from the systems that feed you. And if you start to establish that, all of a sudden, that fear that you talked about of like, what am I going to feed my family? All of a sudden, you can be like, I don't need that anymore. I'm no longer in a frequency of fear because I've got this. I'm in control now, and I can feed myself and I can feed my neighbors if I wanted to too. So I'm set to go. You can, and then that opens up a whole world of whether you could trade or barter. And all of a sudden now you're like, all right, this is my version of freedom. And that seems like it allows you to sort of like sink in and be grounded and say like, I'm good. If shit does hit the fan, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that's where it's at. So when we were actually at Kaylor's event there in September, we were walking down to the lake, and I don't know if you remember this or not, but there was a zucchini sitting on a electrical box. And I've told the story so many times, but it's just such a huge picture of where I think we should take our food system and our global food system. This is for right around the world. If we all grow a garden, if we all do what we can, if we all have a few chickens, you know, maybe you live in an apartment building, you can grow some things on your balcony to eat yourself or share with your neighbors. And there was a zucchini sitting on that electrical box, and it was just there. And we went down to the lake, and then we came back, and that zucchini was gone. And I thought, man, that is what we need more of, where we have extra food that we could just leave it on an electrical box in the middle of the city, and someone who needs it will take it. And if we do that, we don't need big corporation grocery stores to feed us. It's actually not the grocery store that feeds us. It's the farmer that feeds us. It's the person growing the food. And so I think we all should get back into agriculture and back into farming in our own ways. So, you know, we've got beef farmers. Go to your beef farmer, your local beef farmer, and buy your beef, but then grow the vegetables you need. Have a few chickens, you know, just do what you can in the space you have. And that's how we find freedom. You also touched on the word fear, or we've touched on the word fear. I find a lot of times that people who wear a tinfoil hat are a bit of doomsday preppers. They're a little bit fearful. And that's the thing, is I don't like living in fear. I don't want to live in fear. I believe in the one who's in control of the whole picture. And so I'm just following him through the desert. But I'm not fearful. Like, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. It's so biblical. It's written in there so many times. Do not be afraid. And I'm just following that the Lord is taking me where he needs me to go, and he will provide what I need. And in doing that, it's providing for myself, learning to do these skills. Well, I already have the skills, but teaching these skills to other people, you know, so that they can do for themselves what I have for myself.
That's amazing. That is so powerful. And I think, yeah, freeing yourself from the idea that you, like, let's say, you know, things shut down tomorrow and like you can just go out into your backyard and be like, yeah, I'm good. So, and I love the idea that like when you let go of that fear frequency, you all of a sudden are like, you've elevated your state immediately. Like that fear is so dense and so heavy. And if you're constantly living through this lens of like, no, like things are going to go wrong and I'm not prepared, then you can just live in this really low, dense frequency. And like, how is anything, I don't know, I can't imagine how anything would sort of proliferate or be created in that state, because it's so heavy. And so when you create that freedom for yourself or your community or your family, like all of a sudden you're like, I have the skills to, I know you've talked about even like making sourdough and all preserving and canning, like all of those things used to be just a very regular skill set that we all had, right? And I think now it's like it's so beautiful that you are teaching that, because you are literally teaching these freedom skills to people who, I mean, we used to have it from our grandmas and we don't have that anymore. So like you're bringing that back, and like you are taking freedom to a place of sustainability and just trusting in yourself and trusting that you've got this. So I love the program that you have put together. It's really beautiful, and it's so in line with helping people become unbound to the system. It's phenomenal. I love it.
Thank you. Just when you were speaking there, I'm like everybody's new grandma. I'm only 44, but I'm like everybody's new grandma. I can be your grandma. I can teach you. I can help you. And that's the thing for me is I love people more than I love life itself. And so it's not even about the business side of it. It's just helping people. People drive me. People give me joy, and just giving to people, and how can I help and how can I serve? And that's what drives me. And that's what drove me on my farm, is how can I serve people? And now I'm just taking that same fundamental core love of people and just turning it around and giving it in a different way. And so I'm pretty excited about the future. I'm scared of the future in some ways, like where's it going to take me? But I'm also very excited about the future. And yeah, I trust the one who's got it. So
Yeah, that's amazing. Actually, and going back to that zucchini story, I totally remember seeing that zucchini on top of the electrical box, and I was like, "Wow, that is a beautiful zucchini." I just walked past it, and I was like, it's so cool that we can have that." And in Toronto, there's some like community gardens and stuff like that, and I've always been so drawn to that, and it's really a beautiful thing. And I think when you're talking about like being able to serve your community and serving, I like that, that is what we have to do. And you can't do that when you're in fear, right? Like you can't do that if you're constantly scared for yourself or whatever it is. Like how on earth can you pour into other people's cups and serve the community and the people around you if you're constantly living in this state of fear? And it brought me to when you were saying that, I think like you are helping by helping others become unbound to those systems. Like you're filling up your own cup, the one that you used to get through farming, which is beautiful. Um, and now you can actually like you can serve an entire audience, which is amazing.
thank you. Yeah, and that's what it is. But that's what I think we need to get back to. It's back to the whole word community. We talked about community at the beginning, and we'll bring it up again here. Like when you can work together as a community, when you can know your farmer, when you can shake the hand of the person that feeds you, when you can feed yourself and feed your neighbors, when you can work together, when you can trade some tomatoes for some basil, and you both can have pasta sauce, like that is real community. And if you think back 100 years ago, we were smaller. We didn't have cell phones, which is, good in some ways, I think. And so you really worked with your friends and neighbors. You traded and you bartered, and our worlds were much smaller. And I think the problem in society right now is we've gotten so big. We've relied on this big grocery system. We've relied on this big bureaucracy. And with all of this big, yeah, it comes bureaucracy, rules, regulations, control, power. And we need to break away from that. I think the pendulum has swung so far that, yeah, we need to bring it back to more small communities, small local systems. And I think that's how we, the people, can change the world. I think we, the people, have the power to change the world. We don't need a government to tell us, or change it for us. We can do that within the system, within ourselves and within our own communities.
Yeah, I love that. And I've heard the concept of community, it's almost been a little butchered at this point. And like, I feel that there was, and someone described it once to me, that like the idea of this community, and whether it's like you go out and you have your like, I don't know, in Toronto, there's ecstatic dances, or there's like just commute, like the idea of communities at music festivals or whatever. And we just talk like, or in yoga, like spiritual communities, there's this sense of like, oh, well, they're just my community. And you're like, okay, but what does that mean? I feel like the older definition of community, like we used to rely on other people in our community to actually make things happen. Like you relied on the person down the street who would, sell you your eggs. And that was the only place that you could get it. So you had to be kind and nurturing to that. And you had to keep that relationship going. But I feel like now sometimes you hear the word community and you're like, what does that even mean? Because right now it's like, for me, sometimes community is just like, oh, well, I go to a yoga class and that's my community. It's like, okay. I mean, I get that. And I'm not saying that that's not important or that's, you go to your ecstatic dance community and that's the people that you hang out with and chit chat with and share stories and there's value in that. And I feel like the idea of community that we've come from is that you actually relied on them. You relied on the community for jobs in that serviced your home or whatever it was. Like we've kind of lost touch of what community really means these days. And now I think what you're doing is you're actually bringing us back to the original idea of community, that you truly rely on someone for your tomatoes and you provide them with something. And there's this beautiful exchange. And so your community actually means so much more to you rather than just like, I don't want to like make it any less. And, the social aspect of community, that's great. But the actual reliance, that's, I think, like the key. What do you think about that?
Actually, what I was thinking when you were just talking is your yoga community is great. It's fun. It's a fun class to go to, but it's a 1 day a week class. Are those the people that you're going to call upon if you really have an issue? Probably not. And so building community, like when you think of the person that you would buy your eggs from down the road or that you would trade with or whatever, you had to build relationship with them and you had to repair those relationships too. So let's just bring it back to nowadays. Maybe that person down the road voted for Trudeau and maybe you didn't. How are you going to do that? Right. And so building bridges rather than barriers, we need to take that into our own hands as well. Instead of going with all the division, I'm right and you're wrong and you do it my way and I do it your way. We need to start building the bridges to other people and actually become into relationship with them. And it's back and forth and you can have community and relationship and you don't necessarily have to agree. I'm sure 100 years ago, if you took a little town on the prairies, they didn't all agree, I'm sure, but they had to figure out some of those fundamental skill sets of grace, forgiveness, kindness, respect, love. And they really had to work with one another. And I think that's what we've lost because in big cities, it's so easy to, well, I'm not going to buy my eggs from you because you voted for Trudeau, but I'm going to buy them from this person because, and we do naturally gravitate towards people who are more similar than us. But I think that we can't lose the forest for the trees. We have to build community with everyone that we come in contact with, whether we agree with them or not. So I
Yeah,
don't know. That's just a thought.
that old version of community, there wasn't this idea that like, oh, well, I'm not going to come to you anymore. It's like, no, you're the lady that has the eggs. I have to find acceptance. I have to find love for the service that you provide. We have to somehow find acceptance for one another, whether or not you believe. And I know sort of back in the day, there wasn't this, I mean, maybe there was, I don't know enough about that, but maybe there wasn't this huge divide, but I feel like now we have the luxury of being like, oh, there's so much available. So if I don't like that person who I buy those things from or buy my candles from, I can just go find somebody else. Or if someone in my yoga community I don't get along with them, I can just remove myself or not talk to them because there's not a true sense of reliability on those people because you're like, well, it's just my yoga community. It's my social thing. I could just go to another studio or I could do this or I could do that. And it's like, no, and it's so big and luxurious and in big cities like that it's I don't know if it is a problem. It's a thing that we are definitely like, in small towns, I can imagine it's a lot different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to, in a small town, like your reputation. And that's what I used to say to my former customers is, if you're happy with me, all you have to do is post it on social media and I will like bow down to you because I don't want a bad reputation. Right. And so same thing in a community. I told my staff all the time, it's your job to make our customers happy. So in the height of COVID, I had my belief system. I thought it was crazy and I was an anti-masker, a kind anti-masker, but I was running a little store then. And most of my staff were on the same page. And so what we did during COVID was we had both sets of customers come in. We had the customers that were very afraid, wore their masks, wanted to follow the rules and things like that. And then we had the customers that, came in without masks on. And so what I told my staff is I said, we will be kind to both sets of people. And so my staff, they always wore a mask around their chin. And if someone came in with a mask on, they put their mask up. And not because of the government and not because bureaucracy told them to, but out of kindness and respect for the person in front of them. And then if someone came in without a mask, well, they pulled it down and they gave them a hug, right? Like I hugged all kinds of people in COVID because, I didn't see the need to, it just seemed a little crazy to me. And so, but I was still very kind to the people who were different than me because they had different issues. And I think that's what we need more of is we just need more kindness and respect for people who are different than us. And I've actually got lots of friends who are very different than me. They vote very different than me. They live their lives very different than me. And I've had several of them say, Dawn, we like to talk to you because it lets us see into the other side without seeing all the crazy. And there's so much truth to that. When you actually meet a person, when you have relationship and friendship and relationship with another human being who's different than you, they become a person, they become a human being and not just an ideology. And so that's building bridges as well. Like how can we build the bridges to, live in community?
I think and that is like, if you are constantly like living in fear or not feeling like you can like talk to a certain person or be a part of a community, like that's a bound life. Like you are bound to just your one ideology. And if you can break free of that and recognize that like, there may be some things that you're like, I totally 100% disagree with you on that. Holding that into me and like barring you from even being in creating a relationship with you, like what kind of a life is that? Is that a free life? Like I'm gonna guess probably not.
Just when you were speaking there, Jesus came to mind. Jesus actually broke free from the mold. He was the most rebellious man I think that's probably ever walked the planet in such a kind, loving, gracious way. And his people were the prostitutes and the tax collectors were hated. So picture Trudeau, like that's who his people were. Like he hung around with those people. He went to their homes. He broke bread with them and ate with them and, built relationship with them. And I just think that's such a good example that we can start bringing in today. Like just find the people, the broken people, and let's start loving one another and building one another up instead of just tearing one another down and live like Jesus did.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's definitely become a more profound ideology in my own life. So it's beautiful to be exploring that. And there's so many beautiful lessons of just seeing the human being before you see the ideology and committing to being open, just having an open heart, I think is like the first step. There's a book, Michael J. Singer, he does like the untethered life or untethered soul. And one of his things was that like in every single moment, whether you're meeting a new person or entering a new situation or even an old situation that is changing for you, just identify like, are you closed? Is your heart closed to the situation? Have you put up barriers or is your heart open? And if your heart can be open and you can constantly just be aware of that and be like, oh, my heart's closing. Like I do this all the time. And it's like, well, you know what? My heart's closing to that. Like, let me just see if I can just stand a little different, take a deep breath, like see the human on the other side of that and just sort of let it go. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I actually feel better by opening my heart up and not having that like closed feeling because it's a restricted, constricted feeling for sure.
Well, and once you're healed, like I've been in a healing process for a very, very long time. I lost my dad. I went through a divorce. I bought the farm. I lost the farm. So I've had a lot of grief, but through that, I've had to process everything and I've had to learn and grow at myself as a human being. And the biggest thing I've learned over the last 6 years, 7 years, 8 years is how to put myself in someone else's shoes, how to see them for who they are and for their struggles and for what they're going through and have grace and compassion for that. And once you can see someone else, and once you can heal, and once you can fill your cup up, then you're able to give to someone else. So when your cup is full, you can give, and you can have, all those things, grace, love, compassion, and put yourself in their shoes and have, I think that's empathy then, when you put yourself in someone else's shoes and see them. You try and see things through their lenses. And even if you don't agree with their lens, you can kind of see why they are doing what they're doing. And when you can see that, you can just see a totally different person behind there.
Yeah, that is beautiful. And yeah, you might not agree fully, but you're like, oh, but I see why you would think that, or I see how that benefits you to think that, or I see how that nurtures you to believe in that thing, even though I've got a completely other set of beliefs in my own brain, and they serve me in whatever way it is, and that serves you. And just trust that for that person. And those things might change over time, but like trust that that person is like navigating the world from their lens in the best way that they know possible.
Well, and I mean, as human beings, we all think we're right. I think I'm right. I think I'm right in many, many things. I think I'm calling the bullshit out right in my own way. Like I think I'm right. But you will never have someone see that you're right if you're yelling and screaming and getting in their face. That they're just going to be so turned off, and it's not going to help anything. Where you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, right? So if you can be sweet and kind and nice, then they can see, you can just learn from one another and see a different perspective. And who knows, maybe they will. I mean, now I'm being a little cocky, but I'm right and you're wrong. So, but I can love you in the meantime. I don't know.
Yeah, I love that. So, Dawn, if you could go back and if you could see either a younger version of yourself, or if someone came to you and was like, I am feeling stuck, I'm feeling like shackled, I'm feeling bound up in this life that I've created, and I've had this, whether it's an epiphany or a moment with God or just this realization, like that there is something else out there for me. What would you say to that either younger version of yourself or someone who's feeling stuck? Like, what would be the first, baby step or thing to realize, or something to bring into their own awareness so that they could start on their path, no matter how scary it might be, to live a life that's a little more free and a little more unbound?
Absolutely. What a great question. And I learned so many hard lessons, right, over the last 44 years, that I can take all this experience and yeah, I would love to impart it on someone else. So when I think of it, you don't have to be stuck. So the first thing I would do is I would become debt free. A year ago, or just over a year ago, I was $1 million. Me, myself, as a single mom, I was $1 million in debt, or just shy of $1 million in debt. Today, I'm not $1 million in debt. And so that's giving me the freedom to make different choices. So the first thing I would do is get debt free if you can. And then I would try, and I'm entrepreneurial. Like, the system is built that you go to a job, you make a wage, and then that's it. And I would figure out how to make more dollars for your time. And being entrepreneurial, you start off with nothing, and you build from there, and you might even go backwards and build from there. But yeah, figure out ways that you can become different things in your community. And when it comes to agriculture, I think we need to see more small farmers, more small homesteaders. If you are able to have a place in town, so if you have a backyard, I've even seen urban farmers where they grew a chunk of produce in their backyard, not only for themselves, but for other people, and they sold it on the side. And so don't think that just because you're in the city doesn't mean that you can't, have a little side income. I love the country of Cuba. I go to Cuba quite often. And down there, everybody has a side business because you're given so much from the government, and that's sure not enough to make a living. And so everyone has become a little side business person on the side. And I think we need to get back to that, where you have a little side gig. And so if you have, a backyard, grow a garden. If you have 2 or 3 or 4 acres, you can make money off of that. And that's where I come in, is because I've got those skill sets. I know what I've been through, and I know what I've done. And hindsight 2020, I wouldn't have built a 36,000 square foot greenhouse. I would build a little hoop house. I would go smaller and scale up that way, instead of just going big and then trying to sell it all. I would bring it back smaller in a small community. And I'm sitting on an acre of land here right now. And my plan is I just ordered 150 laying hens, which will give me 150 eggs a day. Well, I can't eat that. So I've got to, sell it off the side. And I'm hoping to do some meat birds and things like that. So you can do it, and you don't need a lot of space to do it. We just need to band together as community, buy local, buy from your friends and neighbors, work together as community, and change our world.
Amazing. Yeah, that's great advice. I love that. Get debt free. I've heard that echoed in so many other places of just like free yourself from that first, whatever it is that you have to do, whether it's selling stuff off or just get to that point and then start to create those systems of freedom for yourself and claw back that reliance on the bigger systems in our world. And then all of a sudden things start to feel a little more easeful and less fearful and all that. So that's great advice. That is great
Yeah.
advice. I love it.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And it's true. And, I've seen lots of those like little videos that you see online and stuff. And people are now looking to, instead of buying the big house and the big car and the fancy this and the fancy that, let's make our life simpler. Let's try and live with less. When I moved out, I'm divorced. And when I left my husband, I left with one suitcase. I packed one suitcase in about 10 minutes and I left with basically almost the clothes on my back. And I didn't really need very much more. I've got a whole lot more now. I've kind of gained and accumulated some stuff again, but let's get back to minimalism. Let's get back to, freedom that way. We don't need to buy into this. You have to have this fancy shoes and you have to have this fancy and anything. Like if we just bring it simple again, I think you can live off of a whole lot less, be debt free and grow your own food. And that's where I come in. I'm going to put a little plug in for myself. If you need help to grow a garden or if you need help to raise some chickens, even in your backyard in town, you could do some meat birds if you wanted to. It might be a little illegal, but what they don't know won't hurt them. And you can do this. You can take your freedom into your own hands and do what you can in the space you have. And I teach people how to do that.
Amazing. So Dawn, where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at Dawn's Dirt. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. Carly has helped me. I'm running my own podcast. So I think I'm on Rumble, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Yeah. So that's where you can find me. Yeah. Reach out to me at Dawn's Dirt.
I am learning so much from your podcast. It's incredible. I feel so honored that I am part of the team that puts your podcast together for the world, because honestly, it's really, there's so many beautiful golden nuggets and things that you just like, I feel like every week I listen to your podcast. I'm like, I go and tell people that I'm like, I just listened to a client's podcast and it's phenomenal. And I just learned this big new thing, and you bring on some amazing guests. So, I'll put that in the show notes as well. So people go check out Dawn's Dirt. On Instagram, all those places. And thank you so much for your time today, Dawn. And what a great conversation. I feel like we're on our way to becoming unbound and finding that life of freedom.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today, Carly. I truly appreciate it. And let me tell you, I honestly could not do a podcast if it wasn't for you. I wouldn't even have it out. I'd be a puddle on the floor. I can grow food, but I sure cannot do what you do on a computer. So thank you for being on my team. And that's just it. You're on my team. We're a team, and let's change the world.
All right, let's do it. All right, Dawn, thanks so much. We'll see you on the next one.